Good morning and welcome to Beneath the Plates. Okay, so I think at this point it's become pretty clear that Beneath the Plates is mostly about mental health, personal growth, and kind of like, tactics and things, little ways to, live our lives better or whatnot. And so I don't know. Maybe I should change the name because Beneath the Plates, like so far, we haven't talked much about fitness, but we will. Don't worry. I do still want to do interviews as well. So my goal is eventually to have, you know, maybe one interview a week, maybe more. We'll see. But for now, I wanted to get this going, and this is what this is. And I'm going to talk today about a little tactic I call pre-regret. Now, most successful people have little mind games they play with themselves, right? So like Gary Vee's is one of the ways he stays so positive is as long as he's got like, I think he says the last time I heard it, it was like a core group of like 5 people that were okay. Like nothing else can really depress him or upset him. Like he has like mom and his dad, his wife, his kids, his brother. So I guess it's a few more than 5. But he's got this like relatively small core group of people that he just really cares about. And as long as he wakes up every morning and they're all good, like he's like, my business could literally burn down. Like, and I could lose my business. Those people are fine. He's like, but now, he's like, if I wake up and I have a text message that one of them, died in a car crash, he's like, I don't care how good my business is going, right? So that's like Gary Vee's. Well, all these different things. David Goggins has written basically 2 books about the mind games he plays with himself. Ed Milet's got the whole One More. They all have these different things they use to help them. And I realize I have, in fact, maybe I'll write a book on this, right? Seems how they all launch their careers. Maybe I'll write a book on this little mind game I play with myself, but you're going to get here first. So I've never really thought of calling it a name until this week. And I kind of call it, right now I've been calling it like pre-regret. And it's a form of visualization, which I actually just preached on that on Sunday. I might actually re-record that message because I had to do a short version of it. I might actually post that. Maybe I'll post it on the first. So this idea of what I call pre-regret is, and let me tell you how I developed it first. But the nutshell is basically you look forward into the future. So you pretend like you're in the future. You get an emotional state where you can be in the future and look back to your present. So it's kind of weird. Like it takes, I don't know if this would work for everyone because I don't know if everyone can visualize and manipulate their emotions like I can. So this may only work for some people. So it's essentially what I do is I get in a place where I am in the future, and it can be, 10 years, 20 years, sometimes end of life. I don't think that's as helpful, but sometimes. And I look back to right now, and I look at all the things I regret, right? And basically just, okay, what am I doing right now? And what of those am I going to regret one day? And how I came up with this, I want to back up for a second. How I came up with this is, I would find myself looking back to the past and looking at things I could have done differently. And I fought this for a long time because in one sense, I don't regret anything because it would change everything, right? None of my current stuff would be the same. So like one of my biggest quote unquote regrets is when I was trying to start my business and, we didn't have our third yet. I had my, older 2. And I was trying to start my business and I was pouring all my all my time into it. And we didn't have a lot of money, right? And like I'm proud of the time when I was like my middle son was still in diapers. We were in Clovis, California, and right by Fresno. And I was like going out and doing like the door-to-door stuff to like, okay, my wife would tell me like how much we needed. Okay, well, we need diapers and we need, these things for groceries so I can make, whatever I need to, her plan was for dinner. And I'd go out every single day and I would knock on doors and paint curbs. I'll have to tell this story some other time. And there's a lot of mental stuff and emotional stuff there to unpack. And I would do it until I got the amount I needed. So, and then I'd always add like $5 to it because then I'd want a monster, right? And so I would go out and, if we needed $30 for some groceries, we needed milk, we needed whatever, I'd go out and I'd make that much. If we needed, $60 because we needed groceries and we needed diapers, I'd go out and I would knock on doors and paint curbs until I got that amount of money. And then when I was done, because it would take hours to do this, because you'd have to knock on like 30 doors and get no's to get one yes. So clearly I should have worked on my salesmanship, which is I did. I ended up going and getting a job at a car lot because I realized I needed to get better at this. So then I'd go to the grocery store and buy whatever she had needed, right? She'd give me a list. I'd go and I'd buy it with the cash I just earned. And I'd come home and she would, make dinner or whatever. And so that's what we do. So one of my biggest, so that there was some pride there, but and then we moved a few times. I did the car lot thing and then I was done there. And so I was like phase 2 trying to start my business. And that's really the closest thing. Well, I guess there's kind of 2, but one is I think everyone kind of has. One is just being a better person sooner. But I think that's something that probably 99.9% of everyone could say. And so this idea of oh man, if I just gotten a job, right? Would it have killed me to have, lost, even if it was very minimally part-time? First off, 8 hours a day. Come on, if I was a true hustler, I could have spent an extra 8 hours a day, then come home and done the Gary Vee thing where you're at 2 a.m. on your phone, building your business. And I talked in a past episode, I wasn't even doing things that were going to actually lead to making money. I was just doing all the time wasters because I was starting off as an entrepreneur and I didn't know what I was doing. So yeah, if I'd gone and gotten a job, and right now, if I did it all over, I'd say I'd have gotten a job at a hotel because there's, some skills in working your way up at a hotel that, would have been good. And then there's obviously, they're open 24/7. So there's a lot of flexibility in the scheduling. So that's the closest thing I have to regret is, it's not so much regret because I don't regret it because so much of who I am today and who we are as a family was shaped by that. But if I woke up and I had to do it again, first thing I would do, I'd probably give myself maybe a day or two because, now I've just time traveled. So I'd probably give myself a day or two just to be bask in the, oh my gosh, I remember this and, drive around and go see the old place, all that kind of stuff. But then I would immediately go in and I would apply, I'd make a list and I'd start with the nicest hotels, working my way down. And I'd basically go in and apply to every single one of them until I got a job. I mean, worst case scenario, I got a job at a Motel 6 or something and did that for 6 months and then was able to, and just kept applying to the better ones. And then eventually well, I have 6 months of, experience working at a motel. Yeah, we'll go ahead and give you a starting position. I would have worked my way up, become a manager and done that. Would have been pretty decent money. I could have built my business on the side. But again, my business wasn't going anywhere. I wasn't doing the right things. So that would have given me more time to figure it out, which I did kind of technically eventually do when we moved to Virginia. That was that was just so dumb, man. Okay, anyways, let's not get too caught up in the past. So this idea of a reverse regret is I was just doing when I'm looking back and I'm critiquing things I could have done differently or I wish I'd done differently. When I was early married, I'd have these really vivid dreams about I was wanting to be in visual effects, a visual effects artist and work on, effects for movies and stuff, work at Rhythm and Hues or The Orphanage or I don't know about, I don't think any of those companies are still around. I know The Orphanage isn't. One of these cool effects companies, ILM, right? Weta. I used to dream about moving to New Zealand, working at Weta Digital. But all that said, I would have these really, really vivid dreams that I had gotten a job. And I actually had toured Rhythm and Hues, so I actually knew what the building looked like, what the workstations looked like. So I'd have these incredibly vivid dreams, probably the most vivid of my entire life, with the exception of some night terrors as a kid. And I had a job there, and I was working. I was rotoscoping, doing my thing, and it was all great. And then I'd wake up, and I didn't have that job, and I'd be depressed because it felt real. I'm dang it, I'm still here, not knowing what we're gonna do, And And so this would have been before even like the entrepreneur stuff. And I remember I was like, man, I really felt like that was real. Like it wasn't just like a dream. Like I thought that was real. And when I first woke up, it even took me, a minute to realize, dang it, that's just a dream. That's not my job. And that's not what I'm doing. And so sometimes I think like, what if I woke up at different times and all of this had been one of those really realistic dreams? Like if I could take, like the fake experience of living this dream life. So that's typically how I think about it. Like, going back and what would I do differently and all that kind of stuff. As if it wasn't actual time travel where this stuff wasn't real. But then that's a tragedy. Sorry, I got something in my throat. That's a tragedy in itself. So I'm rambling a little bit today, guys, and I apologize. But we'll get to the point eventually. I think we're almost there. And so that's typically how I think about it. And I realized I went through a period where I was like, I'm looking backwards a lot and about things I could have done differently or if I had to do over. And then, and I remember back then I was always looking to the future. The Bible says not to do that. It talks about, not looking, spending all the time looking in the past or the future. For the life of me, I can't think of where that is. I really hope I didn't just take something like cleanliness is next to God. I swear that's in the Bible. I don't swear because the Bible also says, let your yes be yes and your no be no. But I promise you, that's got to be, I remember, I just can't think of where it is right now. I'll have to look that up. Anyways, so I was like, I shouldn't do this. I shouldn't spend so. It's one thing if you're just like occasionally, like a couple years ago, we went back to our hometown. We had an Airbnb, a bunch of family got together. We have some who still lives there, but it was a central location because some still live there, and then the rest were like flying or driving in from out of the area. So it was like, made sense to go back to the hometown. And I remember I took an entire day with my wife's family. So it's like, hey, you guys are gonna go shopping and do stuff. I'm just gonna go drive around and see, like the old, like where we used to live and all that. And she was like, yeah, okay, cool. So that's fine, right? Thinking about the old day, but like if you're constantly like, oh man, I wish I'd done this different, whatever, I wish I'd done. And I found myself doing that too much. And then it dawned on me, bro, when you were back then, you were looking towards the future and dreaming about the future. Don't then don't be like the young guy who's like, man, one day, and then become the old guy who was like, man, back in the day. And so I'm like, okay, I got to work on the now. I got to, if I'm going to think about the future, it's to build it out. So I kind of had this little pep talk and, I kind of remind myself a couple times, I caught myself doing this. And then it dawned on me, wait a minute. You used to look to the future. Okay, now you're looking back and blah, blah, blah. One day, the present is going to be the past. And just like you're now looking back at things and thinking, man, if only I'd done this differently. Or you're going to one day be looking back to today and you're going to think, man, if only I'd done this differently. If only I didn't care so much about that, or if I put more effort into this. So with that, I'm like, well, what would those things be? And our subconscious is pretty good. Like sometimes it's smarter than we are in terms of knowing we can justify things and we can overbuild things up and whatever. But that's why hindsight, they say, is 20/20, because you're able to get out of your, your prefrontal cortex? I don't know. You get rid of all the emotional stuff and you're like, yeah, I can see how that probably wasn't really the priority. I just got, I was caught up on that, or that wasn't really. And that's why we can look back and we can have regret because we could have done things better, right? So I'm like, what are the things you're doing now? And so I would imagine myself, and that's how it started. Like, what are the things you're doing now that one day you're going to look back on and regret? And it even helped because I was able to look, so I've been here now just almost exactly 3 years. So it's almost January, and at the end of February, it'll be exactly 3 years since we've been here. And that wasn't as far back, right? So I can look back to those things and be like, well, okay, over the last 3 years, what would I do differently? Because I can relate to that a little bit more. Okay, 3 years from now, if I keep doing the things I'm doing now, what am I going to look back on? And again, that's why I call it pre-regret, and I'm going to regret or wish I'd done differently. And so it kind of allowed me to think through that way, and it helps me to kind of filter things because, again, we get so caught up in our own head, are so caught up with like, I got to do this, I got to get this done, and this, and what are people going to say? And so this like pre-regret kind of, I think, helps unlock some of that and process some of that. Because if you can think back, like if you're stuck on a decision or you're stuck in a rut, if you can look, into the future, whether it's 3 years or 30 years or whatever, I feel like if you go too far, it's a little hard because it's abstract. So I've been thinking a lot, like, okay, we got here 3 years ago, and the last 3 years have seemed like forever, but like all the stuff we've done with pastoring for the last 3 years, in 3 years from now, because I can look back and say, okay, the last 3 years, what would I do differently, blah, blah, blah. Okay, well, 3 years from now, what am I going to look back and think? Or I can think about it in terms of like, okay, 10 years from now, when I'm turning 50, well, I guess it's technically like 9 years now, but you know what I mean. Like, what am I going to look back on and say, oh, I wish, because I can look back in my 30s and say, here's all the things I wish I'd done differently in my 30s. What could I look back on and say, this is what in my 50s am I look back on and say, here's the things I really wish I'd done different in my 40s. So, and I really want to maximize those because I've interviewed a few people, and barring like health conditions or a few factors, it seems like most people, I asked them like, what, people who are in their 60s or 70s, and I've asked a few people, I'm like, when were the best times of your life? And most people pick their 40s, right? The really logical ones. Some people pick their 20s or their 30s, especially if they have physical. Like I talked to one person who's not in good health, and she was like basically like, oh, my 20s, because then I'm like, well, yeah, because by the time you get your 30s, you started having physical problems, and she wasn't taking care of herself, and so she's still relatively young. I think she's like in her 70s, but like every day is like hell. Like every time you talk to her, she's like, well, I'm in so much pain here. I wish the doctor would get this figured out, and they just can't find this out. And she's just like in chronic pain all the time and kind of hates her life. And so I'm like, okay, all right, well, barring that, like, so that's about when your health started going down. And so I remember talking to different people, and a lot say their 30s because, they still just remember like peak physical condition. But again, if you're working out, if you're eating healthy, you're going to extend that well into your 50s and 60s, right? So barring that, like filtering that out, it seems like either I've had people either literally describe or say their 40s, or what they describe is it's really the 40s. So I'm really looking forward to like these next 9 years, really 15 as being like the best of my life in terms of a lot of regards. Like I've got my health pretty well dialed in, and I'm continuing to work on it. I finally like got the financial stuff figured out that I really struggled with through my 30s. That taints a lot of my memories back because it's just like we were struggling. And so I'm really looking forward. So I'm like, okay, I want to really maximize. If I think that the next 12 to 15 years of my life are probably going to be the best years of my life, which is, if you look at it from a perspective, is the last 15 years of my life is really what I consider my entire life, even though I'm now 41 years old. Because, when you're a kid, yes, I have childhood memories I look back on, but I don't really identify that as like my life, even though they're my memories, my childhood memories. So if you think about it, or at least if I think about it, the last 15 years, maybe even as many as 20, because that's when I got married and we're getting started. But even by 20 years, there's like a fog. Like, yes, I have a lot of memories, but like I don't, they're memories in the same way of like how I remember a movie. Like I don't identify with that guy when I think back to like even 20 years ago. So it's really like the last 15 years of my life that I look at as my life. And so I think of, okay, so if the majority of my entire cognitive life has been the last 15-ish years, that means these next 15 years that I anticipate to be, so it's like having another entire life. So it's like, okay, that means like I'm like halfway through. Like I had all these childhood memories, but I was a kid and I couldn't do as much because I was a kid. And my last days are going to probably be similar. Like, oh yeah, they're enjoyable, but I'm older, and even if I'm in good health, it's like I'm not going out there and, probably, unless I'm one of those 90-year-old thrill seekers, like hiking, jumping out of planes, that kind of stuff, like in my 90s and even like my late 80s. So Like I anticipate still speaking and preaching and that kind of stuff, but like even like a traveling schedule is not going to be as crazy as it could be in your 40s. So if you look at like the first X amount of years and the last X amount of years is kind of like limited by age on either side. And my last 20 has been, I'll extend it out to kind of 20. So that means like my next 15 to 20 are like, I have like a whole other shot. And so that's why I'm like, okay, I went through all that. I have all these great memories, but these things that I kind of wish I'd done differently based off the experience I have now, using this pre-regret to essentially look back on these next 15 years and like, okay, where am I going to be if I keep on my current path? Where am I going to end up? How am I going to feel about that? What are going to be the little things I wish I'd done differently? And inside of that, like, do I even want to be on that path? Do I need to make a drastic change in this path? Not to go into like midlife crisis cliches, but do I need to do something that, maybe externally might make people think even midlife crisis? Like, do I need to make a dramatic or drastic change? What are the little things, So those are kind of things that are, good to think about. And this could be used for really anything. I mean, you could be going into college and be like, okay, my last 4 years at high school, they were good, they were bad, whatever, indifferent. Okay, I can look back and say, well, I wish I'd done this differently, I wish I'd done this differently. Now going into your next 4 years of college, look back on those and on your current path, who you currently are, what are things that you're going to get to the end of college and look back and say you wish you had done differently, and then do it differently. So that's this idea of this like pre-regret. And I find it really helpful for me. It also helps me to not get too, like when I start to get like overwhelmed in the emotion of like, I missed out or I should have done this different. It also helps release me from that. So I hope this was helpful. And I try it out. Like I said, it might not work for everyone. I don't know if everyone has the ability to imagine that they're in the future looking back to now. And I have this ability where like, I can really feel emotions. I probably miss my calling as an actor, to be honest, because I can put myself in a headspace and really feel those emotions. I normally guard from doing it because then this is why I don't watch the news, because I'll put myself in the situation of the victim or the parent of the victim, and then I get like really emotional and it wrecks my day because it feels like I just went through that. And so I typically avoid those kind of things. I avoid certain types of movies, overly stressful movies, because I put myself in it too vividly, and then it affects the emotions. And so I'm like, okay, well, I typically have to avoid that, but I can also use that to my advantage. And this pre-regret is one of those ways, is to be able to, like I said, pretend I'm 3, 5, 10, 20 years in the future looking back. And and again, I think your subconscious helps us a lot too. Your gut, your intuition, because, you're lying to yourself, but you do a lot, but like you do something like this and it kind of frees you up a little bit. Your subconscious, I think, kicks in a bit and is like, you keep telling yourself this is important, but this is not that important. And I think that is really helpful. And honestly, I feel like that might be one of the big, I'll end with this, one of the big differentiating factors in my 40s compared to my 30s, where I feel like my 30s, I would look at things and see, oh, I want a different outcome, and I would pick up new activities. Where I feel like in my 40s, it's going to be the opposite, where I'm going to see, hey, I want a different outcome, and I'm going to drop certain activities. Because it's just a different perspective like on focus. So where I would try to be focused in my 30s, to me, focus meant let's put a lot more energy into this outcome, where I feel like all I can think of was the word focus. That's not 100% accurate, and it's also too much of a pun. Where my kind of what I'm thinking about that, my mindset on that now, is not so much just to put in more energy, right, is to narrow it, to cut everything else out. So instead of saying, hey, I'm going to put more energy into X, Y, Z, it's like I'm going to cut out the rest of the alphabet. Hey, you want to go and do this this W activity? Well, let's see. W, is W and X a Y or a Z? No, it's not. Okay, no. right? So instead, like before, I'd be like, well, this W is a really good thing. Let's go and do it. And then I'll stay up late tonight and I'll work on X, like on the X aspect of this XYZ thing. Instead, it's going to be like, to me, I'm going to be like, no, I mean, that sounds like a great opportunity, but W is not an X, a Y, or a Z. Hey, you want to come and do this A activity with us? No, sorry, I can't. It's not an X or Y or a Z. So, yeah, and then it's really just coming down to what are the priorities of your life, because obviously if you get the X, Y, Z wrong, you're still going to end up regretting your life. So it's really, what is the X, Y, and the Z? And then cut everything else out. And pre-regret is one way I can use to do that, because it's like, am I actually going to care about this W activity or this A activity or this C activity? Right? This Elementa O trip. Am I going to care about this later? And if I can honestly say, no, I'm not going to care about that, then it makes it really easy to basically, not easy, because we want to say yes to everything, but to really focus on it. So, okay, with that, I'm gonna end this one. This one's probably a little long today. I'm only at 26 minutes, so kind of right in there in our usual. I'm gonna let you know right now, I'm probably gonna be spotty on episodes this week. Well, really for the next 2 weeks, because as I've talked about in other episodes, my daughter is moving to San Francisco, and so it is January 29th. Yeah, it's the 29th. And we are taking her up probably on the 8th. She's got to be there on the 9th. So we're probably leaving January 8th to take her. And I don't want these next 2 weeks to be in my list of things I regret. So that was part of what even really made me aware of it this morning, was using like I was planning out my week and my days and all the things to get done to be the most efficient. And I was like, oh wait, don't let this be one of the things you regret. Man, I really wish those last 2 weeks I'd spent more time with the family. So I'm going to use I did use this technique, and I'm going to basically punt the first 10, well, maybe even as many as 12, depend, because we got to get back and get resettled. So where normally I'm like pre-starting the year off, where it's like so it's like, okay, you have Christmas, maybe a day or two afterwards. And I'm normally by now, okay, it's the Monday, we're coming up on the new year. I am normally like, let me get ahead of my goals. Okay, I've already got all my goals, all my stuff. Let me start working on those now. So when the first starts, I'm already 3% into my yearly goals, or 1%, whatever. And I'm kind of doing the opposite this year. And this pre-regret technique really helped me, is I'm kind of doing the opposite. And I'm actually going to just kind of punt the first 12 days. And so I will be starting basically in like week 3 behind. Now I'm not just taking the time off completely. Like I'm at the church right now, I'm working on some stuff, but I am going to be very intentional with these next 2 weeks. For example, either today or tomorrow, we're going to take a little trip into Elko and just kind of spend the day as a family trip, doing some shopping and kind of hanging out. Because again, I don't want to, end up these days be days I end up regretting one day. So I would much rather, if I have the choice, I'd much rather be like, oh man, dang, I spent like the first 2 weeks I didn't really get anything done, like I could have. Well, I guess I'm going to work harder now. I spent my 30s doing that, right? We just talked about that. Then saying like, man, I can't get that time back. I wish I could. So all that to say, these episodes might be a little spotty because coming in and doing the daily podcast, and honestly, even the Iron Chapel episodes, and even just working out in general, they're not my main focus. I'm not purposely going to just not do them for the next 2 weeks, especially the workouts, but they're not going to be like my overarching, like my routine's going to be a little off because I'm still coming into church, 4 or 5 o'clock, but I'm going to start going home for the day, and I'll be back over, and I'm going to do some stuff there because, she's packing, a lot of downtime, but I'm going to be intentional that around 9, 10 o'clock for the next couple weeks, I'm going to go home and, I got to edit these videos. Why can't I do that in the living room with everyone else? Kind of hang out with the family. So that, like I said, it won't be as productive. I won't get quite as much done. A lot of my goals are going to start off slowly, rather than with, a head start. But using this technique, I realized I have a very low chance of, getting to the end of the year, I have a very low likelihood of regretting starting the year off slowly versus I have a very high likelihood of regretting, who cares about that little extra I got done? I wish I'd spent the extra time. So use that technique to kind of even change my next couple weeks to be a little more focused and more intentional. So hopefully today's episode helped. I'm sure there'll be a few episodes over the next couple weeks, but it's probably not going to be daily. So with that, love you guys. Appreciate you guys. You have a blessed day, and I'll see you in the next episode.